So do you know what, Tom? I've never got on with M-Lock. I don't mind rails, but there's something about the purity of a plain AR handguard, I think.
I'm pioneering this new attachment system, Gadge.
Yeah, what's it called?
It's called not having anything on your gun whatsoever.
Brave, bold.
It's like liberating and free spirit and heading off into the wild with nothing to support you by your wits.
It's a real game changer.
So what we're going to talk about today is accessorising your rifle, your gun, your replica, whatever you want to call it.
But then we're quite experienced older players, and I think when you first start playing Airsoft, and I know I'm totally guilty of this, you get this great new gun, and I got a G36C Marui one back in the day. It had these little stubby rails and a big top rail thing, and I felt the urge to cover it with absolutely everything I could find and have no available free rail space at all. I think I had a laser on there and a handguard and a red dot sight and extra mags clipped onto the side. Probably made my 3.5 kg gun about 5 kg with just stuff I never used.
This is remarkably light, Gadge.
Yep.
I do have one accessory for it though.
Which is?
I've got this entire separate upper.
Okay, I think that's probably like the ultimate upgrade, isn't it? Changing the entire upper.
Change the entire. So this is the one I use when we're doing range testing because it has rail space. I can put modern scopes and everything on it. I would never normally use a bipod. We'll go into that in a minute.
But I think that's the key, Tom, isn't it? Like everything you can put on your AEG, if there's a good reason for doing it, choose the right thing for the job, but try to avoid the rail fixation that I used to suffer from.
Yeah, it's like pocketitis. You have a pocket on your rig, you feel that you need to put something in it. And I think with rail space, people feel the need to cover their rails with stuff.
Well, one thing you always tease me about, and you're right, is that I always forget to charge batteries before I do stuff. And I remember once we were playing at Phoenix Urban, and then the aforementioned G36C had a laser on it. I'm playing in a bright sunny woodland day. Couldn't see it anyway, like pointless. Had a torch on it. Playing in a woodland on a bright sunny day. Pointless. Had a red dot sight. Kind of useful, but even then I didn't know how to use it properly. And I was doing the whole squinty eye thing, but we'll move on to that later.
So let's talk about optics.
Optics, yeah.
Right, Gadge, you've just purchased your brand new Airsoft replica.
Yeah, and I'm obsessed with the idea of having some sort of Gucci sight on it.
When most people's first purchase, their first upgrade, their first modification, probably to put some form of optic on their Airsoft replica. I'd probably suggest learning to shoot with iron sights first.
Which, and again, with that aforementioned example with the G36C, lost the battery from a red dot, took it off, found out actually it wasn't too bad with the iron sights that came with it. But red dots are fun if you use them right. They're probably a bit of a handy upgrade. So I'd say red dots what most people go for first, I would have thought.
So this episode is probably going to be more about what not to buy.
Yeah.
But we'll carry on anyway. So this is an example of what I wouldn't buy. This is a clone EOTech. It's not even a clone EOTech. It's a really cheap red dot in an EOTech shaped body. It's not a holographic sight like an EOTech, and it's horrible to look through.
Yeah, it's a bit smoky, misty looking.
Yeah, it's very, very dark.
And I'm right in thinking it's just an LED bouncing off a mirror at the end of the day, isn't it?
It works the same way as things like this work, but the optical, the reflectivity they have to put on the inside of the glass to bounce the red dot back at you ends up being very smoky, because that's quite an expensive technology. Generally, the optical clarity is really, really bad. The emitters tend to be really hit and miss. They don't hold zero. This one actually moves around inside the body. And
now you say don't hold zero, and a lot of people go, oh, it's an AEG, it doesn't need to. Now, if you're running a gas blowback gun, quite often the recoil just from that will shake your optic to bits. Now, I found with a cheap EOTech clone on my A1, when I was running that for that Task Force Black look, just the recoil off a Tokyo Marui, and it's not much of a recoil, was bouncing it all over the place. It was even, I think it was changing the reticle colour, wasn't it?
You also had a two-colour reticule, red to green, and it would change colour. So probably wouldn't purchase one of these.
It's tempting because they're like 20 quid on AliExpress or whatever.
If you're doing like some cosplay LARP thing and you really want to look like a certain operator and they've got that item on, and you can't afford 600 quid for a real EOTech, I think fair enough.
Yeah.
But in terms of kind of a performance upgrade, not a cheap EOTech.
No.
Some of the cheaper red dot clones are okay. GMP used to make good ones. You and me personally, bear in mind we've got £600,000 guns that we mainly play with.
600 to £1,000 guns, not £600,000 guns, because that'd be crazy.
We tend to go with, and we're not sponsored by Vortex, we tend to go with things like the Vortex, which is going to hold 0, has a warranty, so if this gets shot out, they will replace it.
Yeah.
Some people seem incredulous about that, but
really do. I had mine damaged once, got a new one in a week.
Absolutely spot on.
Yeah.
The optical clarity, though not perfect, is a lot better. If you ever get a chance to look down one of these compared to like your 20-30 quid eBay or Amazon red dots, they look exactly the same. The optical clarity on these is much better. They do hold 0, so if you're using any form of recoil, you're better off. Even on an AEG, with a cheap one, even in transit, if it takes a bit of a bang, you can lose 0. And again, a lot of this depends on whether you actually look down your sights a lot. Because I've had many of the comment on these videos when we're talking about this, people saying, we don't aim in airsoft anyway. Well, personally, I do aim. No. I don't aim by fire. I don't use the white BBs as tracer. I like to put the red dot on the target, fire 1 or 2 BBs and hit them.
No, I'm much the same. And the thing is, people go, oh, it's £100 or £150 for a Vortex. That's the only one you're ever going to need for life. Now, a lot of people will buy a scope like this and then they'll buy a £10 to £20 lens protector, or they'll get it shot out in the first game and buy another one. Most airsofters get through 3 or 4 scopes by buying crap ones. It's one of those things where you buy it right the first time.
Buy once, quite once.
Yeah.
And that's not 100, 150 quid. It's not a lot of money. In the real firearms world, people will often put on optics that are worth way more than the gun that they're sitting on. If you've got a £100 starter AEG, you may not want to put
so you know what you're doing.
£150 red dot on, but I think that's kind of a decent minimum standard. For me, your mileage may vary. I'm not wanting to denigrate anyone with their own choices.
I literally love Vortex do a model called the Spark AR, which is a bit bigger and chunkier than that. I've got 2 of them, mainly so I keep taking it on and off guns for different models, so I don't lose that 0 that I set up.
Yep.
And I know it's airsoft, I know it's smooth bore 6mm, but actually setting up your gun on the range does make a difference.
And there's several videos on that. I mean, we've got a real aim point over here, which is probably overkill for airsoft, and the optical quality through that Gadge is slightly better than the optical quality through that.
Yeah.
There's less edge distortion, light transmission's better, stuff like that. Now, where this does come into more of a issue is things like when you're using night vision. Used to be losing a lot of IR lasers, and we'll go into those in a minute. And the problem with an IR laser, it's like tracer. It goes both ways. If you're using night vision, even really cheap digital stuff,
you'll see it.
You'll see anyone's IR laser or their IR floods being emitted from absolutely miles away. It's just like looking at a torch or a visible. Even worse than a visible laser, it looks like a lightsaber. Yeah. These days, a lot of people are doing passive aiming, which basically means they're looking through their optic under their night vision. So the optic itself needs to have a night vision setting. These Vortex Crossfire 2s do. They're on the lowest. They do have a night vision setting. Aim points obviously do. And obviously, because you're amplifying light through this tube anyway, the better the quality of the light transmission to start with, the better. And also, if you've got even £1,500, £2,000 night vision tubes, which is basically your entry level.
It's the sort of level I've got.
Entry level cost for a decent analog night vision tube, 150 quid at that point really starts feeling a bit irrelevant, doesn't it? Yeah. You may not want to spend 600-700 quid for a real aim point, but this absolutely fine. So it becomes much more important when you're starting to think about that, even if you're going down a cheap digital route like a Psionex Aurora or something like that.
From cheap to expensive, you're still looking at 0 magnification, and you're looking at having a point of aim as a red dot that is going to be constant. There's no parallax in it, so essentially if that dot is on the target, it will hit the target. And that's where I think a lot of people, when they get their red dots, don't realise that once you've set it up properly, you just need to make sure that dot's around. You don't need to be holding up to your eye and squinting through one eye like that. It's actually not the best use of a night.
And we'll probably do a video on the range showing the differences between optics. I think it'd be a nice thing to do. You just touched on parallax. Parallax error is when, so if I'm looking dead centre through this, and I've got the dot centred on a target, and I move my head, that dot will move off. And I'll attempt to show you in the garden later, showing you parallax error. And on a cheap optic like this one, even at very close distances, 10, 20 metres, you can see some parallax shift. If you haven't got a completely square, perfect sight picture, you can easily miss. These get progressively better because the lenses are ground better. So this one has a tiny bit of parallax shift. This one has very, very, very little, even at distances 100 to 200 metres, which is beyond the scope of an airsoft engagement. So that does make a difference. And again, if you're into firing a minimum of BBs at a target, all the better.
That's a big one, Tom, yeah.
I don't even remember what this goes up to.
11.
11 goes quite possibly goes up to 11. It goes up to 10. So this is a 10 power on my DMR.
And on sniper rifles and good DMRs, when you want to observe that fall of shot, I get it. But generally speaking, on your assault roll type gun, you don't even need a 4x optic. It's often quite way too much, I find.
I use, when I'm testing guns on the range, I will use a lot more optic than I would do in a game, because I am trying to watch
that fall of shot.
Where's that BB going in relation to that
and
small
you've
target?
literally got tunnel vision on that target, whereas if I'm playing airsoft, I want situational awareness. So I find if I'm using, for example, something like an ACOG with 4x optic on it, quite often it shuts down what I'm aware of. It's not that easy to acquire targets. Now my ACOG's got a red dot on top of it, so I can use that, and if I think, so is there someone there? I can then do that proper observing, telescopic. Oh yeah, he's there. I can sneak forward, outflank or whatever. I think that's the most you're ever going to need in airsoft, just 4x.
Yeah, I think
on an assault rifle.
It depends on the game. So this is the one. This is my Vortex Strike Eagle 1-6 that you mainly see on the range.
Yeah.
I will use it in a game if there's bigger distances. So if we're at a big exposed site, not like a tight woodland site, really I don't have the range to observe full shot to 60 metres in a woodland site. But if we're something like Humber, where you've got
with the firebase,
you've got longer distance, or I'm playing a mil sim where target identification becomes really important, and I might actually want to see rather than shoot. This is pretty good. I mean, this has got a pretty good 1 power.
Yeah.
It's not as good as a red dot. You do need to be, behind the optic better. And again, I'll try and show you that in the garden about getting your head behind the optic in the right place without any shadow. So this is much more forgiving of bad head position.
The sight picture has to be correct with a proper telescopic scope. They are very. Yeah, you don't want any moons.
And then also, the more magnification you have on, the smaller your eye box gets. So the eye box is effectively the position your eyeball can be behind the optic for everything to be in focus and you to get an unobstructed view. The eye box, as the magnification goes up, gets smaller. That's optical physics. You don't really have one with a red dot. This could be mounted here. It could be mounted here. You'll still have a red dot in focus. Whereas these, you need to be a lot more careful. Generally in airsoft, I think 3-4 power is probably the most you'll want to use.
That's what I would think.
If you're using any more than that, you're probably either using a DMR or a sniper rifle, and you're trying to observe, as we said.
And I'm going to contradict myself for a second here. I've got a short dot on my SRS, and that goes up to 6x, I think. It might be 8. Sometimes I find it really hard to observe the fall of shot on that when it's firing at maximum range, which is about 95 metres on that, I think, when we took it to Thurleston.
Yeah. I can't see a BB. I'm 46. My eyes aren't as good as they used to be. I can't see a BB properly with my naked eye beyond about 50 metres.
Yeah, I'd be about the same.
And with a 1-6, I can go up to about 60, 75, and over that, I'll probably need. Bear in mind, you're looking at a really tiny target. Over that, I'll probably need something like an 8 or 10 power to be able to observe stuff to 80, 90, 100 metres. So it kind of depends on your game. I quite like having some form of magnification in a mil sim or a battle sim when PID becomes really important, when you need to know who you're shooting at.
Because you've not got armbands to help you out.
No, you haven't got an armband.
Look for the camouflage pattern, look at that helmet shape.
Well, you know that anyone looking at you in this direction is definitely an enemy, like you might do in a very linear battle skirmish. Or you might be out to gather information, and it's just nice to have a bit of power. But these are heavy, This is substantially heavier than...
Yeah, you're looking at well over 1 kilogram now, aren't you?
It's substantially heavier than this thing, which doesn't weigh very much at all. But this is, then this is a nice... And again, you can spend a lot of money on a magnified optic. Yeah. This is Vortex's Strike Eagle. It's about £300-400. It's on a really decent mount.
I was going to say the mounts, if you get good ones, can cost money. I remember, again, being an old man here, having a Marui SG1 G3 and had this claw mount. It was quite a cheap one. And you'd run around and it'd creak, and if you creaked the gun the wrong way, the mount would just pop off and eject your scope and mount 2 or 3 metres the wrong way.
So if you're going to buy an optic, getting a decent mount is also really important. Again, it will just shift your zero. If you spent all the time sorting your zero out and you've got cheap rings, these rings aren't particularly great at all. and the thing moves, particularly in transit, you're miles off. And if particularly if you're sniping or doing it on DMR, you want to be able to hit what you're shooting at, and anything else. Well, these modern kind of AR style mounts are really quite good.
I like how I've seen you've got a spirit level on it.
Yeah,
that's really good.
It's actually quite. It's really quite useful for airsoft because a canted gun will curve the BBs off it. So firing at range, having a little spirit level on the back, really quite useful. So that's that. Can you go cheaper? Yes, Vision King do some decent ones. I probably wouldn't get a really naff cheap air rifle scope off eBay or Amazon, anything on those lines. Probably want minimum like a Vision King. But again, I'd probably go with something like a Vortex. They do a crossfire 1-4, which is really quite popular as well.
And again, without sounding like a Vortex fanboy, I think the major thing is, yes, you can get a sight protector, but that's going to damage your optical clarity to a degree.
Yes.
And most people who are shooting with air rifle scopes are not being shot back at. Well, I'd like to think all of them aren't being shot back at. But in the very nature of airsoft is, without anyone trying to wreck your kit, there's a minimal chance that someone's going to hit you on the optics and chip or break an expensive scope. So if I could spend £100 on, I don't know, Brand A's scope, which is really good, or 120 on the Vortex one, and know that if it gets knackered in a game, I've got a new one in a week, it's just a no-brainer for me.
ACOGS, generally, clone ACOGS are universally terrible.
Terrible. The sight pictures are awful. The only one worse than that, I've ever had is the Aries Susat, which you pretty much have to jam your face against to get any sort of
real ones aren't much better. I have looked through real ones. Real ones, though, are optically
very clear,
amazing, and also they have a really big field of view at their zoom setting. So the difference between this one and this one, this lens is enormously bigger than this. It transmits a lot more light. You get a lot more light through. It's much easier to see. You also have a bigger field of view. So when you're looking through the zoomed in, what you can see left to right on this at 100 yards.
Yeah.
If this is on ×4, which is the same magnification as this, you'll see a lot more through this than you will through this. So these are real world. These are great optics. In the airsoft world, they're universally pretty terrible.
And the odd thing is, though, sometimes they're not even that cheap. So the one I've got on my A1 build, which is specific for that build, because I'm doing a cosplay effectively with it, I think that was about 150 quid. So for 150 quid, I could buy a much better scope.
Get a Vortex 1-4.
I could get one of those, exactly. No, it wouldn't look like what the SAS uses on an A1, which is why I didn't do it. But out of preference, so my A1 has an ACOG on. When we actually just go skirmishing, especially CQB, I'll take it off and I'll put a Spark AR on, because it just works better.
So optics, to summarise, I would probably go for, if you're vaguely serious about actually hitting what you're aiming at and you can be bothered aiming, going for a lower end real steel, I hate that word, but lower end real optic. So a Vortex, a Sight Mark, some of the lower end stuff is really good. Generally, if it's made for real guns,
it's going to work for airsoft.
It'll work just fine for airsoft, and it'll have all the things you actually want it to do. If all you're looking for is something to look like your favourite cosplay LARP operator man.
And sometimes that can give them what you do.
And that's just as legitimate as anything else. Then all bets are off. You're not going to get a real ACOG unless you spend £1,000. You're not going to get a real EOTech unless you spend £600-700, and that may well be way above your budget. And also, this doesn't have a warranty, and this doesn't have a warranty.